Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the defensive positions in the NFL draft, gave you my rankings for all of those positions. Definitely a lot of names. I apologize for all of the names and the inundated of information, but let's get to spring games. We talked about this a little bit yesterday. We got to Texas, Oklahoma, and Michigan, but tons of more games to break down. So let's start with USC. And this one was not necessarily what I expected, to be totally honest with you. The defense made a number of really good plays during this game, especially on that back end. Now, the problem with that is the quarterbacks did not play very well. Jade Mayava and Miller Moss both had picks during this game. Jade Mayava had probably a little bit of a better game, but neither had the day that they wanted, and that's definitely not what you wanted to hear or what you expected to hear if you're a USC fan. I think when you look at this defense, obviously you want to see good signs from it. Obviously, you want players to be making plays. So definitely good to see the back end making some of those picks. But at the end of the day, oh, excuse me. At the end of the day, I think when you're USC, the quarterback is where your money is made, and it has to be. So Miller Moss is someone that absolutely exploded onto the scene during the bowl game, but it's kind of tapered off slowly, or has, I guess, tapered off throughout the spring and had a really tough day. But I think he's still the starter for the time being. It'll be really interesting to watch this unfold because it doesn't feel like USC necessarily has what they want at quarterback, at least right now. But the defensive line, we talked about the back end. It was really solid for most of the day. The defensive line was not. There was pretty much not much to be talked about with the defensive line. They had one tackle for loss on a sack later in the game, so not necessarily the production that you were needing. Now, Bear Alexander did not play, who is expected to be the best player on that defensive line, but you need more guys. Last year, you saw Bear Alexander, do his best to fight through double teams and all of that type of stuff, but when you don't have multiple guys on that defensive line, it gets a little bit tough for that one player to be the difference maker that he's capable of being. So overall, I think this defense is making strides. I think D'Anton Lynn has come in from UCLA and made some differences pretty much right away. It feels like this team plays with more energy. It feels like on defense they just play a little bit harder than they have in the past, which has been a problem for Lincoln Riley's defenses and for quite some time, but he's finally started to make some strides to fix that, and I think it's definitely moving in the right direction. Now, I want USC fans to not get too excited because it's going to move rather slowly in that direction, to be totally honest with you. I don't necessarily think they're going to be, overly hurting necessarily for these next couple of years, but it's going to be tough. I think they will be pretty much well below average this upcoming year. I think it's going to be incredibly tough to even be average this upcoming year just because of the personnel they have. Now they're doing incredible things to rectify that throughout the next couple of years, but at the end of the day, that takes a ton of time. To build out what Lincoln Riley is picturing in his head is a really hard thing to do. So I think USC has taken steps that I honestly had not expected them to take at this point, but still a very long way to go. But as we talked about, the quarterback play was not ideal. Jade Mayava did show off his athletic ability with some designed runs during the game, but there's not necessarily that elite guy that you've had with Lincoln Riley offenses in the past. I think Miller Moss will likely be the guy that lines up under center in week one, but who knows? There's a ton of question marks around that position right now where I'm sure USC fans did not necessarily expect to see question marks. I mean, all three quarterbacks for USC combined for 396 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 4 picks, with Miller Moss throwing 2 of them. So there's not a lot to be super happy about necessarily at the quarterback position, but when you have Lincoln Riley, you got to give him the benefit of the doubt. You got to feel like he's going to be able to figure it out. So I think they'll be just fine. I think they're kind of in a weird spot where I expect them to honestly struggle as they step into the Big Ten, but I think they're making the right steps. I think it'll take time, especially with making the step into the Big Ten where physicality is only going to ramp up and the aggression is only going to ramp up. But the steps are being taken, and it's going to take some time for the benefits to be reaped. But there's definitely a palpable change within USC the last little bit. But let's move on to USC, or not USC. We just did USC. Let's move on to Florida State, and let's talk about, first of all, the most pressing topic around this game that has to be talked about off the top. Those quarterback jerseys stunk. I don't know what they were thinking. I don't know. I get the idea, but man, those were rough. But let's move on to the actual football. DJ Uyunglele was DJ Uyunglele, which is not necessarily what you want to hear if you're a Florida State fan. He, throughout his college career, has been the guy that has shown these remarkable flashes of arm talent and of athletic ability, and then for the next 3 drives, he looks totally flat. And then he'll show you another flash of remarkable athletic ability or arm talent, and then he'll be, really inconsistent for the next 3 drives. So it's that frustrating cycle that has gotten DJ in this position that he's in right now. But it seemed like he was making strides in that in the spring for Florida State, but it did not look great necessarily on Saturday. I think he will figure it out, but they're going to need more from him than they got on Saturday if they really want to compete for a national title this upcoming year. The good thing for them is the running game looked really strong. You had guys like Roydell Williams, who came in from Alabama, Lawrence Toafili, who was a huge part of that offense down the stretch as they dealt with Jordan Travis not being in the lineup. You had Keziah Holmes also had a touchdown. Jalen Lucas showed off his athletic ability. So tons to work with in that running back room, but you're going to need DJ to give you a little bit more, even with that running game probably being as good as it's going to be. The defensive side of the ball looked really solid, pretty much top to bottom. I think the back end looks really elite. You have Fentrell Cypress coming back for a second year, but Azariah Thomas is someone that really showed out in this game, is definitely someone that could be kind of the next, big-time cornerback at Florida State, could definitely be their lockdown guy, their number one guy this upcoming year. Super physical, I think. He's someone that is going to be huge. I think this entire group, to be totally honest with you, on the back end for Florida State might be the strength of this defense. But the edges are giving them a good run for their money. I think the play from the edges were just remarkable on Saturday. You have someone like Marvin Jones coming in from UGA. He showed off his athletic ability. You have tons of other guys at that position that are going to make difference-making plays. But Marvin Jones is someone they probably needed to come in and make a couple of plays to start off, and he did exactly that. But one of the biggest takeaways from the day, and definitely the low light of the day, was Malik Benson, their expected number 1 wide receiver, being carted off with an injury. Has plenty of time to get healthy, so hopefully he can get healthy and get back on the field, but definitely not what you wanted to see if you're a Florida State fan. But let's move on to Notre Dame. And Notre Dame has plenty to look forward to in 2024. It feels like that defense is coming together really, really well. Probably will be one of the best in the country. You have Riley Leonard. But honestly, I think the thing that made most Notre Dame fans the most excited was the play of C.J. Carr, who probably won't be their starter until 25 or 26. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. But Riley Leonard did not play, so tons of reps for him and Steve Angeli, 2 guys that looked incredible. Both guys looked really, really strong. The wide receiver group seems to have their wide receiver 1 in Chris Mitchell. Now they have still a ways to go in that wide receiver room in terms of figuring out the pecking order and making sure everything fits into the boxes you need it to fit into, but I think the ability is there. I think you have Chris Mitchell, you have Jaden Greathouse, Bo Collins, Deion Colsey, so tons of guys in that room. You just have to be able to fit them into the right position. So it'll be interesting to see how they kind of go about that this upcoming year. The O-line is also kind of a work in progress. When you're replacing someone like Joe Alt, it's never going to be easy, right? So they're definitely going to need to get a little bit better unless you want Riley Leonard kind of running for his life a lot of the time. You're going to need to get a little bit better at that offensive line and at that point of attack if you want to be the national championship contender that they're definitely capable of being. They just need that offensive line to be a little bit stronger than it has been throughout spring and it was on Saturday. That defense looks solid. I don't think there's any question about that. You have guys like Xavier Watts on the back end. You have Riley Mills in the front. You have Jason Onye was the guy that really jumped off the page on Saturday, was the standout of the day, and was just really remarkable, was all over the field. So I think they have tons of talent. I think that defensive line might be the strongest part of this team and this defense, but that back end is really good. When you have 2 guys like Xavier Watts and Benjamin Morrison, things go pretty well for the most part. So very interested to see what this defense can do, because that's likely their path to a national title, is having that stout defense and then having an offense that can run the ball, be aggressive at the point of attack, and pick their points in terms of the passing game. So I think they're really a good O-line away from being a playoff contender. I think Riley Leonard will make these wide receivers look a little bit better because he's going to be able to put it on them, and on target, on time is 90% of the battle in college football. So I think this is going to be a good team. There's a couple of positions that just need a little bit of fine tuning is really the only thing that Notre Dame needs at this point. But let's move on to Texas A&M, and tons of players were out for this game, so we'll touch on a couple of things here, but not necessarily as deep of a dive on this one. The back end of the defense looks really strong in Mike Elko's first year. There were tons of elite passing attacks in that SEC, so they absolutely have to be stout on that back end, but it feels like they brought in some guys from the portal, they brought in some guys from high school, but there were definitely some guys already there that could play some really good football. Losing a guy like Jacoby Matthews to the portal is really, really tough, but the ability is still there on that back end, and with someone like someone like Elko calling the shots, I think they'll be just fine. To be totally honest with you, O-line is the position group that I think definitely has a lot of ability. Definitely has a lot of guys that, when you look at their high school rankings and you look at their measurables, is just remarkable. It just hasn't quite coalesced into a good starting five yet, but I think it definitely will. I think it's a group that will slowly start to kind of find their pacing. I think fall camp will be hugely important for them because you kind of have to hit the ground running. You play Notre Dame very early on in the year if you're Texas A&M, so you pretty much have to be ready to go from the get-go. So that O-line will be a huge thing to watch throughout summer into fall camp, but I think they'll be okay. I think the names there, I think they have enough guys to where they'll be able to mix and match and find the five that will make this work. But the guy that really stole the day was Nick Scourton, the transfer from Purdue, had 2.5 sacks, 3.5 tackles for loss, a pass deflection, did just remarkable stuff. Shamar Stewart, another guy on that defensive line, had 7 tackles and a sack on the day, so this line is going to be aggressive. They're going to be very good. They have tons of talent on that line, as you have seen through the last couple of classes, but it feels like they're starting to come together and have a couple of guys that are absolute game changers in Scourton and Stewart. So very excited for this team. I think everyone knows about Texas A&M. The talent level is not to be questioned. I think there's a ton of really, really good players on this team. I think Connor Wegman is ready to take that next step forward. But the coaches putting them in winning positions is going to be the decider. And they have a really solid staff there. So they should be able to do that. But they'll be very interesting to watch because the last couple of years it's been a ton of ability, not a ton of results. But we'll see what happens with them. I think they definitely can hit a really high ceiling, but could hit a pretty low floor, to be totally honest with you, this upcoming year. So it'll be interesting to watch. Spring games are starting to kind of wind down. We definitely do have a couple more this upcoming weekend and going on into the next couple of weeks, so I will break those down as they come. But that will do it for this segment of the spring game takeaways. And when we come back, we're going to talk about a top 10 Tuesday, and I will give you my favorite prospects of this class. This could be guys I just really like watching, guys that I think play the game the right way, guys that I think, are cool. I don't know. But these are just 10 guys that really stand out to me that I think will be total difference makers at the next level that maybe are getting overlooked right now. But we'll be right back with that, so stick with us.